بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to lesson 9 in our series on TAFSIIR. We're now going to be moving into an area of linguistic aspects of the Qur'an, the language of the Qur'an. And there are some of the topics that are treated in your textbook, such as aamm, alkhaass, mutlaq, muqayyad, which they're also usul fiqh topics. And I've already dealt with them in considerable length in my usul fiqh lectures. Therefore, I will try to really compress any discussion of those topics and instead expand and bring in some other topics in order that as you progress through your curriculum that you're not just getting a repetition. So as we're starting to talk about the Quran as a linguistic phenomenon, of course, it is primarily something that is recited and heard, oral, O-R-A-L, and oral, A-U-R-A-L. And so the first thing that strikes anybody, even if you don't know Arabic, is that it's a rhythmic, extremely rhythmic, it's delivered in a chanting voice, and has this musical quality, and there's a strong phenomenon of rhyming. However, the rhymes of the Quran don't very often fall into the category of what's known as pure rhyme or complete rhyme. And in fact, before I even get into that, I mean, the Quran, it just didn't fit into any of the genres of Arabic literature that preceded it, and there's really nothing that's come since which is anything similar to it. It is the unique book. And so, the Arabs before Islam, they had like 16 or 17 very, very specific genres of poetry, and there were very strict rules about the rhythm, the meter, and the rhyme. Even the subject matter, like the qasida, it always had to open with a sort of nostalgic recollection of bygone days when somebody has come upon the ruins of some village that they used to live in. It's all this kind of very, very formal stuff. It has to fit into that pattern, otherwise it's not right. So the Quran it came with completely different structure and topics. It wasn't dealing with themes that Arab poets like to deal with. Now, when we get into the actual sound of it, we're talking about rhyme. There are occasions where you do have pure rhyme, as in Surah Tur, the first 3 verses. وَالطُّورِ وَكِتَابٍ مَّسْطُورٍ فِي رَقٍّ مَّنشُورٍ. And then, it shifts off that. It turns into what is called an incomplete rhyme. وَالسَّقْفِ الْمَرْفُوعِ, instead of ending in waw ra, ends in waw ayn. And then it goes back. وَالْبَحْرِ الْمَسْجُورِ, goes back to the waw ra pattern. And then after that, it starts to shift into other patterns entirely. So what you actually see, the vast majority of the Quran falls into what's called near rhyme. So complete rhymes like moon, June, spoon, where you have a final vowel and a final consonant, which are the same, exactly the same. What you see in Arabic is an extremely common pattern that runs through it. Not Arabic, the Qur'an. Extremely common pattern that runs through it is the long vowels of waw and ya being the rhyming element. So, and these two are considered close enough together that when they're used together, it qualifies as a rhyme. Now, you see that real clearly, and this alternating back and forth in Surah Al-Insan. هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا. So you have مذكورا, and then the next verse ends with بصيرا, and then the third كفورا, and the fourth one سعيرا. So it keeps shifting back and forth between ura and ira, and then eventually it gets to ya lam alif, salsabila, zanjabila, but the vast majority of the verses end in either ira or ura. And you have entire surahs which have that ending on an alif pattern. Surah An-Nisa, the great majority of it is like that. Surah Al-Ahzab, Surah Al-Insan is an example. There are others besides. But then you have exceptions to it. The final verse in Surah Al-Nisa, it ends in the nominative case. Alim, Allah is all-knowing. It's as if it's seguing, if that's the right pronunciation, into the surah that follows it, which is Al-Ma'idah. And a very common near rhyme in the Quran is what's called nasal rhymes, eem and een, which you see very clearly in Surah Al-Fatiha, Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawm Al-Din, Nasta'een, Al-Mustaqim, Al-Dallin. So it keeps shifting back and forth between ya mim and ya nun. And then the example that we gave earlier is what's called a liquid rhyme, liquid consonants, where it shifts between lam and ra. And then you have the third type of rhyme is where it doesn't fall closely into that kind of pattern. If you see in Surah Al-Furqan, verses 4, 5, and 6, you have quite diverse types of rhyme. It's called an assonant rhyme. فَقَدْ جَاءُوا ظُلْمًا وَزُورًا. That's verse 4. At the end of verse 5, بُكْرَةً وَأَصِيلًا. Verse 6, غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. And then فَيَكُونُ مَعَهُ نَذِيرًا. So you have very diverse types of rhyme. You can see that there's something kind of like a rhyme going on, but it's it's very diverse. So this is called Assonant Rhyme. And then you have, like in Surah Qaf, Qaf wal Qur'an al Majid, everything ends in a ya, almost everything in a ya, followed by one of these letters, almost always with a letter of qalqala. Majid, shay'un ajib, raj'un ba'id. But then you have kitabun hafiz. Okay, it's not a qalqala, but it's a thick sound. Amrin marij, qalqala. And in Surah Al-Kahf, everything is on the pattern of fa'ala, or with slight changes, fi'ala or fu'ala. So it's first verse ends in iwaja, 2 hasana, 3 abada, 4 walada, 5 kadhiba. And then a little past halfway through the surah, you get a shift where you get on the pattern of fa'la or fu'la or fi'la. So there's a sukoon before the final syllable. So rushda, this starts with verse 66. Rushda, sabra, khubra, amra, dhikra. And you have this really complex and just very, very rhythmic driving kind of a rhyme and rhythm pattern in Surah Al-Qamar, where everything ends in or ir. But it's more complex than that. It's like the third syllable before the final stop of each ayah, you have a shadda or a near shadda. So you have this sort of, you're gathering up, and then you're one shaqqa al-qamar, shadda on the qaf. Sihrun mustamir, get the shadda from the tanween blending into the meme. Amrim mustaqir, fihi muzdajar. Okay, that's not quite a shadda there. So again, it's not 100% on the same pattern. فَمَا تُغْنِ النُّذُرُ, back to the pattern. شَيْءٍ نُكُرُ. There, the shadda has shifted to just the next to the last syllable. مَاءٍ مُنْهَمِرٍ. So you keep getting little shifts, but the pattern, basic pattern is there. And it's that that variation around the theme that makes it fascinating. It's not monotonous. You have that tension between the median pattern and the individual sort of wobbles and warbles around it, and that saves it from falling into this monotonous kind of drone.